Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for a bit of a special one. It is ROGD Awareness Day. ROGD, of course, stands for Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria, the word given by Lisa Littman for the current, you might call it, I don't know, trend of more and more young people identifying as trans, and really kind of entering into a number of bad situations as a result. Parents have been joining together to try and counter what's happening to their kids. Genspect is helping them. And from Genspect today, I have an old friend of the show, Saoirse Connolly. Saoirse, hello, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Very, very good to see you, or better for having seen you, Saoirse. It's lovely to hear that you're now working with Genspect. How did that come about?
That came about a couple of weeks ago. I was doing some odd jobs to fill the time after being cancelled, which was fun. And then Stella popped into my inbox, and the rest is history.
Great, great. Well, I'm so. Can you give people a short refresher of why you were cancelled and what happened there?
Right. So back in March 2021, I opposed a student union motion on my campus in NUI Galway. So they were trying to ban what they were branding far-right extremism, but it was also including women's groups,
Yes.
LGB groups. So, not exactly extremism. It was more an attempt to suppress free speech and allow certain activists to suppress ideas they didn't like.
Sure.
So at the time, I was really involved in the college community. I was really involved in disability activism, very, very active in the community. And so I opposed this. It goes viral, a whole bunch of articles about what was happening to free speech on Irish campuses. And as a result, I got socially shunned.
Yeah.
So nothing that I was doing was renewed. So I was like a member of national disability advisories. I had a part-time job with the college. All of that stuff fell through. So yeah, that's what ended up cancelling me, was standing up for women and
What
LGBT
was it?
rights
What was the college again?
at National University of Ireland, Galway.
National. Let's make sure people hear that the National University of Ireland Galway
That's right.
got rid of a disability rights campaigner because they didn't like her defending freedom of speech and women's rights. So something to be not very proud of there. Sircia, let's go on to our guests. We have three parents joining us today. Our first is Gigi, and Gigi, I thank you first of all for coming on the show. I realize that you can't show your face for reasons that will probably become clear, but thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us how did this all start for you, and where are you now? What's been happening with you?
My daughter was about 13 when she declared that she was pansexual, and this was on the heels of a week-long sort of intensive at school about different identities.
Yes.
And then she segued into gay, and this was over a course of about 6 or 7 months. And then she was cute. We were totally fine with all of this. This is normal teenage behavior. I had never heard of pansexual, but I was like, okay, whatever you guys want to do. And it didn't seem particularly threatening, despite the fact that 90% of her class identified as something other than heterosexual. It struck me as a teenage thing. And then she started spiraling, anxiety, depression, and her behavior really changed. And then there was the revelation that she thought she was really a boy. And so that sort of set me into the rabbit hole of what is going on. I was on Google all through the night for about the first 6 months trying to figure out what the heck was happening. Came across Littman's study, which really, really gave a sort of structure to what was going on, because everywhere else was just affirm your kid, bring them to Children's Hospital, affirm your kid. So instinctually, I knew this was sort of something else. And thank God for Littman's paper. But I was horrified to see that what similarly happened to lots of people is that they are canceled because they are combating a narrative that makes no sense. And I think that that's really the complicated part is, Brown University pulling the paper was shocking to me. And then I realized what we were up against. So 3 years later, my daughter's doing really well, still in it, but mentally well. She's been seeing a psychiatrist. She's been seeing a psychologist. We were lucky enough to find people that weren't abject affirmers, which is very difficult to do. I think my husband was hung up on 20 times trying to find a psychologist who would just acknowledge that it might be a social contagion. So it's been very educational and really, really, really difficult, but not nearly as difficult as other people's stories.
Yes.
So
Right.
in a way,
So
we're lucky. And
you're on somewhat good terms with your daughter, and you're still connected and so on. Good.
Yes,
good.
and what is
Okay.
incredible to me is how many people will tell you you're going to end up in a nursing home if you don't affirm them, and I'm like, well, so far so good. She's still living at home.
Yeah, good. Well, I'm really happy to hear that, because we know a lot of these relationships break down. I'm not sure if that's a good segue or not into our next story. This is Lynn. Lynn, hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, hello.
Gigi, I was just asking Gigi about her relationship with her daughter, which, as we know, often breaks down with these kinds of situations. How is yours doing?
Well, I don't actually have one. So I have two kids who both fell prey to gender when they were young college age. And I, like most of these kids, they were really intelligent, kind of socially awkward. We all have heard these stories now over and over again, and they're almost identical. It's scary. So I don't want to go into too much depth about what happened with them, because, those are their stories. But I'm sure most of us know by now that nothing but a celebratory parade would have really suited them. And
Yes.
I wasn't able to throw them a parade because, trans is an unfalsifiable belief system. It's really a religion. It's a faith. You believe these things and you declare them, and so they are, right?
Yes.
But when your kids grow up, they can ascribe to whatever faith belief system they want to, but I I don't need to also believe in trans. And I don't. I believe in biology and I believe in truth. And so because of that, I am not only estranged from my two oldest kids, who both have become medicalized, but I'm also estranged from my youngest, who is an ally. So I have not had a relationship with my own children for several years now. And it's not
I'm
only,
very sorry to hear that, Lynn.
Thank you. It's not only a huge loss for me and has caused me a great deal of grief. I had a very, very difficult time adapting to this. But I worry about them. I mean, I think my children need their mom in their life. And I worry about their health and their well-being, and I can't help them. I can't reach out to them. I'm just kind of more or less helpless.
How old are they now, did you say?
Well, my son transitioned way back in 2003, and he went to Thailand and had surgery. So he's actually 40 now.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That's terrible. That's really
yeah. He's not doing well. He's not doing well at all. And then my daughter.
When you say not doing well, do you mean that the transition wasn't successful in sorting out whatever mental problems he was going through?
He's brilliantly smart, and he's living in a tent on the streets in Portland. So no, I wouldn't say that he's doing well.
Right. Right.
I think that he's living on the streets in Portland, the best intelligence I have. My daughter, in 2018, I accidentally found out that she had changed her name and started testosterone, and she immediately cut all ties with me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was really shattered. I ended up starting a Facebook group for parents, and that group now has almost 400 members, even though it's not searchable and you have to get invited. And I mean, it's just, these are just word of mouth. And I've heard thousands of stories now. So,
Well,
it's
let me bring in Gigi so we
yes.
can hear her story, and then we'll branch it out again to a wider
Mhm.
conversation. Oh, sorry, not Gigi. I mean Elliot. Excuse me. Sorry, Gigi. Hello, Elliot. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, my pleasure.
So, can we hear how did this begin for you? How did you get drawn into this situation?
Yeah, my child is young, still at home, so that's why I can't be on
Sure.
camera. But my child made his announcement during the COVID lockdown after, an entirely online life.
Right.
After getting the school coaching in the GSA, that's the Gender and Sexualities Alliance club that he joined in middle school, he started having problems in school around 7th grade, and he was bullied and called homosexual slurs and physically assaulted, and had a very tough time, and then started, something was going on, but he wasn't communicating much. And I was in the midst of chemo treatment for breast cancer when he made this big announcement that he felt more like a girl than a boy. And yeah, at first we were, we're liberals and we were affirming. We, honored his request for a name change and pronouns, and we made an appointment with the gender clinic. And we assumed there'd be this thoughtful process. Everybody assumes it's this long, thoughtful process with assessment and mental health support. And, I think my story is pretty common to others, where my kid had a 1-hour Zoom consult with a social worker and was put on puberty blockers. And,
Wow.
We were given this information that was glowing. It's a pause button. We'll give him time to, it was her. By that
Yes.
time, you had to say her.
Sure.
She'll have time to consider her gender and all this, and completely reversible and harmless. And my kid, who already had serious mental health issues, he had been hospitalized for a suicide attempt a year prior.
May
And
I
was
ask,
not,
was this known to the person who prescribed puberty blockers?
yeah, it's the same medical center. It's, all those records are shared. So they knew that not only had he been hospitalized and then in an intensive outpatient program, at no point in that intensive outpatient program was he referred to a gender clinic. At no point was gender mentioned.
Right.
Body dysmorphia and self-hatred were mentioned.
Yeah.
So even with that information, they just focus, once your kid says that they're trans, every other issue just fades into the background. They don't care about anything. So we got this glowing information about blockers. And of course, I was kind of in the post-cancer, I was dealing with surgery, and I probably wasn't I was too trusting. You just assume that the clinicians are knowledgeable and honest.
Yeah.
And we put him on blockers, and immediately I felt that there was something wrong, that this didn't make any sense. And he spiraled quickly downhill, very quickly downhill, to the point where they recommended, neuropsych evaluations and an autism spectrum disorder evaluation, and that he be put on a mood stabilizer.
Right.
And at no point, did they say, well, maybe we should take him off the puberty blocker. And subsequently, in talking to other clinicians, they said, yeah, they should have just taken him off, that it was not helping him. It should help him.
May I ask, how long did he continue on the puberty blockers?
It took just under a year for me to get him off of them. And part of that was because the medical, that group was stopped communicating with me. I couldn't get a meeting with them. I couldn't get them to answer my questions. And they had put him on a 6-month blocker. Usually it's 3 months at a time, but they ran out. And so they put him on a 6-month blocker. So I had to wait for that to wear off. But I, rescinded consent. My husband and I rescinded consent, but we had to wait that 6 months. But in that 6-month time, it took letters, to the CEO of the medical group and talking to the ombudsman, even to get a meeting with the gender clinic.
how like ROGD Awareness Day is tomorrow. Why do you want to kind of get your stories out there? Is it because you found that there's so many kind of commonalities between them? And if so, can you tell me what a few of those are? I mean, you mentioned, for instance, being online over COVID. Is that
Sure.
something you've all found that there's?
Yeah. I think, I'm in a couple parent groups and all our stories, and I started reading, articles finally when I could find things online. There were some stories that were so identical to my kids that it was scary. It was terrifying to see, exactly the same, profile, mental health profile, the bullying, it could have been my child. And I've heard so many stories like this.
I had the same experience of coming across writing and thinking like, wait, did I write this? This is exactly my story. Like, this seems very familiar.
Yes.
I will say that I've noticed the pattern. There's patterns. And so like my kid falls into the same-sex attracted depression, anxiety pattern. There are kids who fall into the Asian adopted pattern, which is a new cohort that's emerging.
Sorry, could you say that again? The what
Asian
pattern?
adopted Asian kids.
Okay.
That's a very large growing group, which,
Really?
obviously
Wow.
this is anecdotal. There's no studies,
Yes.
but this is anecdotal. But there's a
Sure.
parent in South Carolina who called the agency from where she adopted her child, and they said it's very common, more common than you would expect.
Yes.
And then you have autism spectrum. That channel is incredibly, as you know, prolific as far as kids, black and white thinking. Like, it's really obvious to me. And the one thing that I have noticed, I have never come across a single story where it wasn't revealed at some point that there was some aspect, trauma, same-sex attraction, one of the patterns I just described. There's always something. And I think that that's the part that I find to be so fascinating about how medical providers are just ignoring those aspects, because everyone has one. And so I think, there's a parent with a child who was groomed online by a sexual predator, who was a serial rapist, and a couple months later she's trans, and I'm thinking, well, gee, I wonder why. She's probably terrified that if she stays a girl, that something will happen. So there's tons of those stories out there, and I think that's the part that's the most baffling, is the ignoring of the most obvious thing to me, which is that something is driving this. It's not just a natural phenomenon.
Yes, I was speaking to Richie Tulip, who's suing the NHS over here about this, and he said that I think it's not that people don't understand that it's not so much like entirely predatory men who are doing the grooming. It's a whole kind of support network of people, including journalists and celebrities and so on, who've created a kind of self-grooming machine. Does that sound true, Lynn?
Absolutely
I would
accurate.
say yes. I would definitely agree with that. And Gigi and Elliot are completely correct. I mean, I don't even know how many parent support meetings I've attended where you go in a circle, everybody has the same story. We all have the same story. And furthermore, this is really exploding at university. There are what people don't realize, there are trans dorms at university where these kids are all living together. And at university, you might remember that in Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, several of the stories are about girls coming home from university and saying, Mom, I have something to tell you, and I want to switch dorms. Right. And, the girls are going to the health center with, they're having trouble adjusting, they're kind of depressed. And there's a lot of anecdotal stories coming out where the people at the health centers, the counselors, have said, well, have you thought that you might have a gender, thing going? And these kids are obtaining hormones at the health center at the university. And when you listen to a lot of the stories of the detransitioners, the huge majority of them, they accessed all this care when they were over 18.
Yes.
So, we really need to start talking about all the young people that are being affected. ROGD is affecting these kids at these ages because that's when you're figuring out your identity.
Yeah.
And you do that when you're 20. You're trying to figure out, who am I and where do I fit in the world and what do I believe? That's the task we do when we're at that age.
Also, the insanity of arresting a natural development, which is in itself a cure for dysphoria. Like most people who go through a natural puberty desist from all this. So the idea of freezing people in their current confused state is one of the most nightmarish things I've ever come across. How do you think I've also seen recently, I think it was Boston Hospital and some other hospital, quite flippantly talking about gender affirming surgeries, like having your ovaries removed.
Yes,
it's not
hysterectomies.
Yes, hysterectomies. Excuse me. It's not just the kids and who are there doesn't seem to be any adults in the room. I would imagine that it all feels very lonely for you guys.
Yeah, well, that's
Not
why.
anymore.
Yeah, that's why we're in support group.
Yes.
We are so connected now. There's thousands of us. We are connected, and just watch the Pit Substack and what has happened. And I mean, I started my
Pit,
blog.
I should explain, is Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans. It's a brilliant website. I really recommend anyone who needs to find out more about this, subscribe to it. Sorry, go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah. So, and Substack is full of blogs now. Mine, I started one. It's called Gender Apostasy. I write about the experience of parenting, and loss, and because this affects the whole family. It affects the parents, it affects the siblings, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles. Everyone in the family is affected by this, and it's just so difficult.
Sircia, can you tell me, what exactly have you got planned for ROGD? What exactly is, like yesterday, it went on for a few days or something, didn't it?
So what we have planned.
Sorry, it's unfair to ask you about the one that you weren't involved in, but yes, what do you have?
Right.
what do you have coming up?
The idea is of it going on for a kind of a few days is to accommodate the time zones.
Right. Yes.
So it's starting, like our launch is obviously this interview tonight at 11 p.m. and then it'll go on until the 17th. Yes. Because
17th, right?
Yeah,
yes.
You have to accommodate everybody.
Yes, I believe Australia is already in ROGD.
Yeah, that's right. You see, so it's like, so we're doing it like that. But this year, we're revisiting some of the content from last year because it's still like relevant, really great. Like it's so relevant and brilliant. So that will be happening. We are going to be releasing some very interesting stats, like raising awareness of like a detrans study that was done and the findings by Detrans Reddit. We are going to be like really trying to push what ROGD is, because there's a lot of myths out there that it's like a diagnosis and that's what the activists are trying to say. And it's like, no, this is a phenomenon that needs a lot more research and a lot more attention. And the idea is we need to get this message to as many people as possible, because this is a real problem and a real social contagion. And the activists are trying to make it seem like this is some sort of conspiracy when no, it's not. This is what's happening. And the more people who know, the better. So all of our content for tomorrow is, short videos, graphs, like facts, like on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. So yeah.
Right. I got you bleeped out there for a second, but I gathered. We'll put all the links to anything you need us to in the description below. Now, recently we found out that 1,000 families are going to sue the Tavistock Centre, which is obviously wonderful news, because it's what we've been waiting for in many ways. The lawsuits, we knew that once the lawsuits started coming in, this would crumble, but that number 1,000, there's been some questions about it, whether it's accurate or not. Given what you know about how many people are in groups with you and so on, would you say it's probably true? Would you say 1,000 is a reasonable number to expect out of this class action?
I would imagine there'll be plenty more. And I think the revelatory part about the puberty blockers having an FDA warning put on them just recently, like that's the part that I think
Yes.
people are unaware of, is the developing story. We're in the story as it's happening. And so I think most people think, you look at past medical scandals, this is how it plays out, is it's happening in real time. And so I think there are people who probably put their kids on blockers thinking they were safe and reversible, and now they're finding out that they're not. And so I think that that's going to prompt more people to look into this more carefully, I hope, and question their choices, because I can't blame people for doing what they did. They were told by medical professionals that this was the right thing to do.
Yes.
So shame on those medical professionals.
Yeah, I would imagine it's not just the Tavistock that's going to end up being sued. I'd say a lot of therapists are going to get it as well. It still strikes me as absolutely extraordinary that this nonsense ran through therapy like a brush fire. The fact that none of them had the curiosity to look into the studies about, or to look into the lack of studies about testosterone. Like, didn't they find out that testosterone causes vision loss and swelling of the brain? These kids think they're turning into the opposite sex, and they're just turning into an older version of themselves. It's terribly. And here's another thing, Lynn. Don't you think that we're coming up to almost a self-fulfilling prophecy? We've always been told that trans healthcare is important, but now, of course, trans healthcare is going to involve dealing with the wreckage of these years.
Well, I worked all my life as a registered nurse, so I've been in healthcare all my life. And in every other area of medicine, we look at, we ask for quality review, and we look at the data. We don't normally run healthcare, especially healthcare on kids, on the say-so of activists, and this is a really big problem. I recently met a young detransitioner who told me that she was on testosterone, had no surgeries. She stopped taking testosterone because she developed so many horrible side effects, like kidney damage. Okay. She's off, but she has been forever. Like, when she told me all the things that have happened, it's just profound.
Yes.
She is damaged. Her body has been profoundly affected for life. There's no cure, not ever, and she can't sue anybody. Now, if you had side effects like that for any other thing, say heart surgery or blood pressure medication or something else, and people were having these horrible side effects, there would be an investigative study immediately. And there needs to be one, and it needs to be unbiased.
That's the frightening thing about this. I don't think you can imagine something with greater stakes. We're talking about the safety and well-being of children.
Healthy children. Children. There was nothing wrong with these people.
Yes, that's very true. They've been made ill. These children are being made ill by doctors. Sorry,
these are our children. This is why we're angry. These are our children.
Yeah. Gigi, did you have something to say there?
It's a manufactured healthcare crisis. And I think the part that's mind-blowing to me is how we've been talking with political representatives in our state, because they just passed a couple of heinous bills that will propagate this. People don't know. It's ignorance that drives this for a lot of politicians, because they assume, like we all do, that it would be vetted and it would be evidence-based and it would be something that, of course, they're not going to try to do something harmful. They have no idea. And so I think that the more we bring awareness, which is what this conversation's about, people are waking up.
Yes.
And it just takes constant conversation. To every opportunity you have to have a nuanced conversation will plant the seeds of doubt in people's minds that believe in this, and eventually we will win. It just takes time.
Yeah. Elliot, you were saying, this is now basically a full-time job for you. Is that right?
It is. I don't know that I was saying that, but I mean, it has become quite a big chunk of my life, because, you want to stay on top of what's happening. And quite frankly, it becomes a bit of an obsession. It's your child. You're desperate for answers. You're desperate for a sign that things are shifting. So you want to see, a light. You're looking for a light. And of course, I want to do what I can. So I participate in, whatever I can do to help out the various groups. And I'll be leading a parent group in the fall because, of course, our numbers of parents who need support are growing.
Yes.
So,
How fast are they growing? Have you noticed that it's beginning to, like, I noticed in America especially, there just seems to be a lot more awareness suddenly of what's going on. It's gone from zero coverage to, you just see little cracks in it here and there. Have you also found that your numbers are swelling?
I think, for me, I have seen a steady increase. It'll just be, every week, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, there'll be another parent and another parent. I mean, I have to say, I don't think awareness in the U.S. is growing very rapidly because, our mainstream media doesn't cover this,
Yes.
at least this side of it at all. I mean, you see very little, unbiased coverage. And so people really do not understand what's happening. And the clinicians, I don't even think a lot of the clinicians really get it. I mean, I have talked to so many clinicians at this point who either think this is just like being gay, or they point to old, debunked studies as a justification. I mean, they're not thinking deeply about this at all. And of course, our administration, our Biden administration is pushing this. And
I hate to say it, but Biden doesn't look like he's pushing anything himself. It looks like this is all being just decided for him. I mean, the some of the stuff that's happened under Biden is so insane. All they need is a half. Sorry, listen to me tell you about American politics, but it seems to me that all they need is a halfway sane Republican leader, and the Republican leader will walk in because you don't get between people and their kids.
Yeah, absolutely. But, again, people, people's opinion on this is it's been so stunted by the media. It's very hard to undo that narrative, very hard to undo it. And, I mean, I was a liberal Democrat for my entire adult life. And, I can tell you the pressure, or just, the assumption and the pressure to support what is seen as a social justice issue is just, to stand up and say, hey, I'm questioning this. You get incredible pushback. I think we've all lost friends. It's very difficult, or else we can't, speak our minds. I mean, it's unbelievable to, at this point in life, to say that I can't tell people what I believe about a medical issue.
Yeah.
I think we've all experienced being told, well, that is not happening. That is not happening. And then we're asked, okay, well, prove it's happening. You have to prove to me that that's really happening. And we're just like, I have to prove that this happened to my own child. And I really believe that the burden of proof should rest on the people who are promoting these treatments. It's their job to prove that these are safe and beneficial. Why are we being asked to prove they're not?
Well, one of the reasons why that is because trans rights activists enjoy employing suicide as a form of coercion. Have you encountered this mentions of suicide or threats of suicide? Anyone here?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah.
All three
I
of
wanna
you.
know-
Wow.
I want to know where all, if trans people have always existed and there have been all these suffering transgender children throughout the ages, how come they haven't been committing suicide by the handful up until now? We're just now finding out that all these kids have been suicidal from day one. This is not even true. They made this up. They made it up.
But it's permeated into medical.
Yes.
So I have an acquaintance who's got a nephew who went to a health center near us and was told that he has a 50% chance of committing suicide. And because I have been vocal anonymously, but because I have been vocal, and we have friends who are we've confided in about this, she called me to say, what do I say to her? And so I would say, as much as the burden of proof shouldn't be on us, it is on us to impart the new knowledge to people, to explain to people that doctor has outdated, and it's hard for me to say this because I'm like, that person has a degree from UCLA and I don't, but I can tell you that they're basing it on erroneous information. And if you just cast doubt enough in that parent's mind, they may reconsider. And you just have to keep those facts at your fingertips for when people ask you questions, so you have something to say back in those moments. And that's what I'm crafting for myself.
And
Right.
also, this is like the opioid Porter-Jick study. This is our
Yep.
Porter-Jick study, is this suicide stat. I've had, physicians tell me about, there's a 40% chance your kid's going to commit suicide. And as someone whose kid, has had a suicide attempt and who has suicidal ideation at times, this is not something you throw around.
Yeah.
It is absolutely, goes against everything we know about how you talk about suicide. And if you ask them, where do you get that information? Where do you get that 40%? They have no idea. Well, they heard it. It's just like Porter-Jick. It's just like Porter-Jick. They heard it from somebody else who heard it from somebody else. It's like telephone, except suicide for our children.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing with J.K. Rowling's transphobia. No one can ever point you to the actual evidence itself. They can only point you to think pieces by, trans influencers that are telling you she's a bigot because they say she is. I've never seen a movement get so far on such thin grounds. They have nothing, no evidence, no studies, nothing backing up any of this stuff. And yet it's what the vast majority of people in both our countries think. It's extraordinary. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that's not a question. It just sometimes hits me all over again that we are where we are. So listen, we're coming up to 40 minutes, so that's probably a nice, neat time, I think. What are you hoping that that ROGD Awareness Day does tomorrow? I mean, obviously, we want to raise awareness, but Sircia, what kind of things can people do to help, and how can they contact you? Do you know what I mean?
Right. So what we really want to achieve tomorrow is dispelling the myths around rapid onset gender dysphoria first, because there's a lot of kind of that it's a phenomenon, not a medical diagnosis, and dispelling kind of the activist myths, around gender identity, the suicide myth, all that kind of stuff. And we want to make sure that, as many people hear about this as possible. So the idea is to share all the content with the hashtag ROGD Awareness Day and get it to as many people as possible, because that's the only way. That there's going to be more research to figure this out and to fight against the propaganda, really, because they've got no proof.
Yeah. As I say, there's nothing. It's based on nothing. It's such a strange fight to be in when you're actually just trying to get people to do their jobs at a basic level. But thank you so much, all of you, for doing it. And I'm sorry for what you've all been through. I'm glad to hear some happy stories. I'm sorry to hear some other, not so happy. But thank you for what you're all doing. It's very, very important.
Thank you.
For having us so much.
Sorry, Elliot?
Just thank you for having us on, and also for the work you're doing. I can't tell you how meaningful it is for people to see non-parents involved in this. It's a very different.
I'm a parent.
Experience. Well, I assume you're.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. No, Well, I mean, as we all know, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And if I was silent in the face of what is, I think, a hugely damaging movement to children, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. So thank you very much again for joining me. And I hope tomorrow and today, if you're in Australia, is a huge success. And please keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Not at all.